Um, Hi, I'm Brinda. I am joining you from India. And before I start, it would be great if people in this session today actually take a minute to sort of introduce themselves in the chat, however they want to, and would be great to know where you're joining from, because then you know. While I am, facilitating this session, it would also be useful for me to, sort of talk about situations that are also relevant for your reality. Although my work itself or the work that I'm presenting today will be based on my work on India, research on India. Um, I would still like to sort of bring in examples, if possible, that sort of reflect your realities as well. That makes sense to you also, because there is a lot of overlap between the experiences of people here in India, especially trans people, and across the world. And we will talk about that more as we, go on with the session. I'm just going to quickly share my slides. Okay. So before I begin, I want to acknowledge that the presentation today is based on my research study, Gendering of Development Data in India, Post-Trans Act 2019, published in 2023 for the Association of Progressive Communications as part of the Our Voices, Our Futures project. So before this session is technology, AI, and gender. And to basically go further into that, it is important to actually understand what AI is and the aspect of what machine learning is also, to better understand what we are talking about or the role it plays in decision making based on gender, right? So artificial intelligence is basically is the general attempt to create machines that are capable of making human like decisions. And to be able to make human like decisions, then you train them on the decisions made so far by human beings under different circumstances, right? For different groups of people. So basically, what basically artificial intelligence does is it understands human behaviors to replicate it based on usually existing data, and sometimes you also create a profile. Okay, and we will go into that also a little later. Now, machine learning is a smaller part of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence includes many other different things. Machine learning is one part of it, like what I said, the subfield where you actually use algorithms based on these large data sets. You map out patterns of behavior, right? It's like and like, if I have to give you a stereotypical example, then to say, you know, the suggestions that come up on different platforms for us, right? You might realize that you have gone and seen videos of puppies once or twice, maybe even actually once, and then Instagram will start suggesting only, reels of puppies for you, because it's not assuming that that's the only thing that you're going to see, but based on just your previous decision, decides to then your past behavior basically tries to sort of replicate the same thing in a way, hoping that you will respond to it. But suppose you, let's say, swipe through that and don't want to see it, then Instagram will stop suggesting puppy videos and will suggest another thing that you just looked at, and that might be something related to, I don't know, violence, some war, and then your feed will start getting filled up with all war news, right? So that is basically machine learning. Same way YouTube videos, Amazon, these are all some examples, right? And also translation from other examples are translation from one language to another. Stock market prediction, past data, what has the past trends been like? So then you sort of map that out, like in a similar manner. Now, automated decision making. So this is broadly how artificial intelligence works and machine learning works, right? This is layman terms. And when I say large scale data sets, I'm talking about millions and millions of data points to sort of map decisions and take decisions. Okay, automated decision making is basically machine made decisions without human intervention. For example, if you are to, let's say, you know, get health insurance, loans, right? So, how a service provider might map you then will be based on many different categories, data that has already been categorized or accumulated related to a specific profile. Let's say that's where gender is a very important category. Let's say, what is the user behavior of a woman who is 25 to 35 years old, who falls between this bracket? And then what is their level of education, right? Where do they live? Do they live in the urban area, the rural area? What is their level of income? And what are their other behaviors like? What is their spending pattern like, right? And so when you map all these things, what then happens is, broadly, these data sets club people, right? Broadly, let's say what the user behavior is for women between 20 to 35 in a certain income bracket. So then you splice and dice the same data set depending on, women as or gender as the primary category, and then their income, their education, and you might get different results. And these algorithms that are developed based on this understanding is very, very complex. It gets developed in what you call as a black box. There is no actual reasoning or the logic that, you will not really understand. It is not really known very clearly how these decisions are made, but these decisions are made on the existing data, right? And so gender then can play a role in this decision making by these systems, right? And why do I say that gender can play a role? Because if you see historical behavior of how different data systems have understood women, right? It's like saying all women like pink, or how gender is understood. It's like, just like puppy videos are suggested, right? Automatically, the first assumption, still in a lot of apps and shopping websites, etc., might be stereotypically the colors and designs suggested will be, there will be a certain pattern to it, till you break the pattern and choose a different design or I don't know, color that doesn't match your supposed gender identity, right? How this system understands. So how the system then understands your gender is also based on what you go and fill up there in your profile. When they ask you to register on that platform, they are collecting the data of what your gender is, and then based on that, they are suggesting designs to you, colors to you, and then over and above that, they are also collecting data about how you're responding to these designs and colors. So then they say, okay, this let's say this person identifies as a woman but doesn't like pink color, likes other colors, and they're only getting your they're asking very often for your gender identity, or basically your sex identity, even assuming that you are a certain way because you were born a certain way at birth. And that's a very binary understanding of gender itself. So this is how machines are trained, not because of machines are biased. It's because of human beings are biased. Human beings biases have seeped into design thinking, technology design thinking itself. And now, if we are to now, like we say, if we are to look at the binary understanding, even like globally, international organizations that set standard, recognize gender rights, Actually, when I was looking up, looking up for this presentation, to put together this presentation, the United Nations Human Rights Council also, Commission, sorry, Human Rights Commission, mentions gender stereotypes, and I went through the entire page, and the entire page is still talking about women when you talk about gender. There's nothing there about gender beyond the binary. So this is also a very important part that needs to be recognized. The fact that gender as an understanding is not beyond the binary, even within global organization, international organizations like United Nations that hold nations accountable for their understanding on gender and actions, policy decisions on gender, right? And gender beyond the binary, what do I mean by that? Everyone identifies only with the gender assigned to them at birth. People who don't identify with the gender assigned to them at birth fall within the transgender spectrum. And transgender as a gender identity is usually clubbed within LGBTQ community, which also talks about sexuality. And very often people say it's a very fluid state, etc. I agree. But I also beg to differ here, because gender has a direct implication on your identity documents, identification documents, which are necessary to enter data systems. Because that's how the state identifies you. Your sexuality is not how the state identifies you on documents, it's the gender. What you put in the gender category in your ID documents is how the state recognizes you. And that's how you get recognized as a person, right? Your personhood is recognized only with your identification documents. So then, gender, international organizations, even international organizations looking at gender in the binary, then leads to a lot of erasure. But that's also due to the lack of recognition of genders beyond the binary in many countries. Transgender people continue to be criminalized in many countries, and where transgender people are still recognized, right? Even within those countries, because of historical colonization and other factors, and also criminalization of homosexuality, transgender persons still continue to be discriminated against. So the violations against transgender persons have not completely been addressed, even in countries where all the countries rather where the rights of transgender persons have been recognized. So here I have like put together or shared, AI Now Institute has done considerable amount of work on gender, race, and AI. Okay, and some of these factors are very important to recognize and understand the implication of using artificial intelligence based for gender minorities as well as for different racial identities, right? For instance, now we take up gender. See, the composition of the people creating or designing technology is also important. The gender of the people designing technology, when it's not part of their reality, right? It is hard for them to think about it unless they're trained to do so, unless they become conscious of it. It's not an automatic thing for people to think about the needs of other identities. For instance, the AI industry comprises only of 15% of AI research staff, right? The staff who work on AI, only 15% constitutes of women. And there is and that's at Facebook, and at Google that's 10%. And there is no public data on trans workers or other gender minorities, right? So then we really don't know how much of intentional inputs go into the design of these technologies, artificial intelligence, which might be taking large scale decisions, right? And because the vast majority of AI designs also assume the gender is binary, reinforcing the inequalities. So there's also, when we're talking about Facebook and Google, we're talking about these large technology organizations which are shaping the understanding of AI and, in many sense, human behavior, because that's how much we consume these technologies, right? On one hand. And then we're also talking about organizations like United Nations, right, where these larger international organizations that are supposed to hold standards of human rights, both these ends don't basically fully consider the rights and space for individuals identifying beyond the binary or anyone even within the trans spectrum, right? So this is a very important thing to understand, the kind of implications that AI can have on gender minorities, and even for, and I'm not talking about just transgender people, right? Although the work, because of the work I do, I'm talking about a lot to do with transgender reality, but this is very true for people who identify within the binary and with their assigned gender, even for cisgender women as well. Like I gave you the example of the kind of suggestions, the colors that are assumed, even if you say you're, because not all women like pink. And that's also a very wrong assumption to make, right? Women like all kinds of colors. I know a lot of women who love black and hate pink. So, just saying. So, I'm sure we will get a lot of diversity, even right here among the participants today, also, right? So, what are the ways in which, broadly, it's also important to understand the ways in which data is collected about us, and in all these different ways, gender data is also being collected about us. Okay. Broadly speaking, like I said, identification documents. This is how you enter the state's system. And many countries here, although I have, okay, I've mentioned the example of Aadhaar in India, right? But many different countries have, and this is now a thing, to have digital ID in different countries. Using digital ID as an instrument of recognition, recognizing an individual, right? And when citizenship is dependent on this national ID, which is digitized, it causes a lot of problems for marginalized communities across different identities, be it gender, race, sexuality, caste, religion. These IDs cause a lot of challenge for a lot of different kinds of people, including people living with disabilities, right? Because the access to technology or the digital process itself becomes a lot of challenge. But what happens when there is a national ID like this? There's a number that can track you across different data sets, right? Across the different services that you access using this particular number. So then there is also, please keep in mind, there's a privacy aspect that is very important, right? The privacy of these individuals who live with marginalized identities also becomes a very important thing to take into consideration. Now, then the same kind of profiling, sometimes some platforms ask you to authenticate your identity using ID documents. I would suggest not doing that, especially using your national ID for safety reasons, but also because what many platforms do, including platforms like Facebook and Google, they map you across the different products that they use. Like you watch an ad on Instagram, or you click on something on a web browser, and you get the same thing across on your Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, everywhere. And there have been instances of where in lower income circumstances, situations, people use shared device in a family at home. Women in rural areas don't have access to a mobile phone. What we take for granted is not the case for people, gender minorities across, right? So then you're looking for, let's say, I don't know, address of an abortion clinic or contraceptive, and it's a shared device and you don't know how to clear the browser data, you might actually get an ad popping up on the Facebook account, the account of some other family member, right? That creates a lot of different other challenges for individuals. So this is also something to keep in mind again. Same way you use common login like Google ID across. We often get very lazy to create different IDs with different passwords for different platforms. We say, you know what, I have one Google account, let me just sign in everywhere within this one Google account. what then you're also doing is giving permission to all these different platforms across. So you're giving, by signing up, you're giving Google permission to access, let's say, your Amazon data because you've logged into Amazon with your Google account, and Amazon also to a certain degree to understand your Google also in terms of location, where you're at, IP address, a lot of different things. So these are also ways in which you are sharing your gender data, right? So this is not just gender specific, but gender is also a very important factor in these different situations. Now, in terms of now, if data now across all these different ways we enter data systems, right? If someone gets access to this data across all these different ways, ID document, online behavior, all of this, and maps it together, right, they can potentially take automated decisions for each of us, like as individuals. Now, what is the challenge then in using ADM or automated decision making for, let's say, transgender persons in India? I'm going to use India as the example because that's my area of work. So, like I have been talking about so far, automated decision making systems are dependent on large scale data sets to actually predict user behavior and take relevant decisions, right? And the data on transgender persons has been limited. And this is the case across the world, right? Like for many different reasons that I mentioned so far: colonization, criminalization. And in India specifically, there's historical criminalization because of British colonization and HIV. So then you're automatically, and these are data sets where the state has recognized transgender people for the first time. Transgender people were first recognized only as a community to be criminalized under the Criminal Tribes Act during the colonial time. And then post that, it was to pathologize them because they were spreading HIV, or supposedly so, right? So these are the two contexts under which the state first recognized this community, and this is something that needs to be taken into consideration, because that kind of has continues to have remains like a shadow on the understanding of transgender persons in the country, and we automatically assume that every trans person is a sex worker. So there's a certain sense of thinking about transgender persons, and to add to that, sex work only got recently decriminalized in India. So then there is that criminalization background again gets associated with transgender persons because of sex work. And the need for them to do sex work or to beg is because they don't have other sources of income. And there is a high level of discrimination. Even for those who are educated, it is so difficult to get access to a job that because of a lack of choice, they often end up doing what they do as well. But now, with the Transgender Persons Protection of Right Act in 2019, the rights of transgender persons has been legally recognized. However, this has not really fully solved the challenges for transgender persons to enter data systems, because there's a lot of challenges for trans people in changing their name and gender to their self-identified name and gender. It requires two-step process. First step, you have to recognize in the system that you're transgender, for which you don't need a medical certificate. But then to identify within the binary, the law says that you require surgery to identify within the gender binary. However, after the community protested, right, the rules of the law sort of distilled it down to a medical certificate. But you still need medical intervention of some sort, right? When you say medical certificate for a doctor, it can even be a therapist or a psychiatrist letter, but to say that this person is who they say they are, right? And then it is dependent on existing documents. Trans people often run away from their homes because of severe domestic violence from their natal family, because they identify as trans. And when they run away from homes, they're not carrying their ID documents. So like the law recognizes trans people, but it has created a process that is inaccessible. Further, it has also digitized this process, right? Expecting trans people who have dropped out of school very often because they were discriminated against, expecting them to fill out a detailed online application form is again another barrier, another hurdle. So then trans people only change their ID in documents that work for them, that are easy for them. So there will be a data mismatch on online systems, even if you try to map this one person across all the systems. I would say, so you can then ask me, do trans people need to be mapped across systems in their same name and gender? In fact, it's far more dangerous, no, for trans people, not just trans people, with people living with multiple identities of marginalization. Let's say your race, your caste, if you're from marginalized backgrounds like that, it's not just only trans people, but to be then recognized across different data systems causes a lot of security issues also, or can cause security issue, right? So now, sorry. So this, I have so far mapped the kinds of challenges that trans people kind of face in changing their ID documents. Further, although the process is online, the online process again replicates the digital, offline challenges. Example, you submit the application, your application gets rejected, and you don't know why. So you show up again at the government office in person. And in the government office, there can be arbitrary physical checks, which is actually a human right violation of trans people, right? And the fact that there is a medical certificate required, not all medical professionals are trans friendly. So, and like I said, these behaviors, or the discriminating behavior, is again based on the existing stereotypes related to trans people. Medical professionals again being inquisitive, being curious about what their body looks like. Trans people are not experiments for you to learn from as medical professionals, but that is something trans people often face. So do intersex people. Again, when you talk about, so the replication that I said, right, the replication happens, and thus people get left out of the system. When they struggle to enter the system with these processes, they just don't get into the system. They try to maneuver with it in other ways, get by in other ways. And even if they show up online, right, let's say on social media platforms like, say, X, formerly Twitter, you go look up words like, in the Indian context, hijra or kinnar, you will often see that these words are used as slurs. And this is how the understanding of these words are perpetuated on platforms like X. So if this large volume of data of people abusing each other, using the word kinnar or hijra, is used then to train data systems, what do you think will be the understanding of transgender by automated decision making? And based on that, you decide to make decisions for trans people. What would that be like, right? So that's also something we have to think about. So this is, and similar things can be said about slurs used for other marginalized identities also, right? Not just only trans people, but this is just one example. So then, due to now, with all the decision making being digital, especially in digital welfare states, heavy reliance on data, there is a heightened need to prove one's identity. You have to do, especially for marginalized communities who are dependent on the state for different provisions without guarantee. Yeah? You have to first be part of data sets to become eligible for any kind of state service, especially in India. So transgender persons continue to struggle with entering data systems due to various reasons, like I mentioned: systemic discrimination, gender-based violence, lack of valid ID documents, inaccessible name and gender change process. Then it becomes, then this results in denial of access to their constitutional rights. When they cannot prove their identity, it becomes denial of access to their constitutional rights. One needs to also then question if digitization or automated decision making or even artificial intelligence is technology that is actually useful to make decision for a population group for like transgender persons who in general have been discriminated against around the world, not just India. India is just one example, but I'm sure in everything that I shared that, there might have been some resonance. You might have seen with, your particular country or circumstance or situation. So it's also important for us to look at, like, while I have spoken broadly about trans people, and I'm not largely spoken about sexuality here, I have only spoken more about gender identity. But like I said, it's the entire spectrum. Very often, because the understanding of gender, sex, sexuality is missing, people don't have a clear understanding of it. People automatically assume that a gay man, for instance, is probably a woman, or there's feminine, make the person, I don't know, misgender the person, very often face harassment. There's a certain that kind of behavior against anyone who is queer identifying also. So which is also why it's important then for us to recognize, especially as queer people, to understand the different ways in which our consent is taken, right, to record data on our gender, sex, sexuality. Are we aware of the ways in which data is collected? Are we aware of the ways in which we are giving our consent? How much information are we sharing, right? And where or how do you think data is collected about our gender, sex, sexuality without our consent? Have you thought about it? And how do you think this data is being used? And what are the ways in which LGBTQI plus people could protect their data and exercise agency with respect to their data? I mean, these are questions that won't have definite answers, and the answers to these questions are quite broad. But I want to leave the floor open, in fact, for us to have a conversation about these questions, right? If you've thought about it, what your thoughts are. How do you think? I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thanks, Brenda. I'm also going to stop recording just so folks can start sharing. So I will stop the recording. Thank you very much. And those who are watching the recording, good questions to think about or talk to others about.